Welcome to the sixth study on the book of James. This study is going to cover 3:13 through 4:12. This study is going to appropriately be titled The Wisdom of God. And as always, please join with me in prayer as we ask God to open our hearts and our minds to hear His Word. God, we thank you for an opportunity to be here to hear your Word, God, and to read your Word. I pray that you would open up our minds, God, our hearts, our ears and our eyes to hear your Word, God, and to know your Word, that we might be changed because of it, and be glorified as we do so. Amen. Now, I think to fully understand what James is trying to convey in this section, we must remember what he has just told us. Remember that James discussed that what comes out of you, either in words or in action, is a reflection of who you are at your core. Can a fig tree bear olives or a grapevine bear figs? Well, no, of course they cannot. And that is the point. Your nature produces that which is in line with your nature. If your nature is directed toward God, your life will produce love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. But if your nature is directed toward yourself, then naturally you will be a selfish person. And so James continues in chapter 3, verse 13 by asking, "Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by his good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom." Or in other words, what comes from your heart is a portrayal of the type of wisdom one attests to. Remember the context James is working out of. Now, the Zealots held to a paradigm that suggested retaliation and violence were both religious and wise. James here urges the poor by waiting on God instead. James was proven wise years later by the aftermath of the Zealot revolt, when Judea was devastated, Jerusalem destroyed, and its survivors enslaved. Remember that James is speaking out against a prideful sort of wisdom that held that killing and murder were satisfactory means to their own foreseen end of redistribution of wealth and resources. The wisdom of the world was characterized as selfish ambition or self-interest at the sake of others. This is at complete odds with what Jesus' royal law to love your neighbor as yourself, the characteristic of the wisdom of God. Now James says in verse 14, "If you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, of the devil." Listen to what James is saying here. People in his day were exploiting others for their own gain. They held their power over others so that they could receive what they wanted, and in their mind and in the mind of the world, they were wise to do so. And I wonder if we are any different. The world is constantly telling us that we should do, and earn your paycheck so that we can get the best clothes, the nicest cars, and so that our homes will look like those in magazines. You know, we're not told to care for those we have to walk over in order to achieve our goals. We're simply told that we should work hard so that we can get what we want. And it only seems natural, right? I mean, didn't I earn the paycheck? Didn't I work long hours and work hard so that I could climb the way up the corporate ladder? Don't I deserve what I have? You know, I hope you can hear how me centered we are and our world is. We are told it is all about us. And unfortunately, this mentality has crept its way into Christianity. The church promotes a very consumeristic faith. But look at what James says regarding such wisdom. Verse 15 says, "Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, of the devil. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice." Now, the way of the world is at complete odds with the way of God. You cannot live by both the world's standards and God's standards. James is making a dichotomy between the selfish way of life that the world promotes and the self-sacrificial life that love promotes. Both are not wise. The wisdom of the world is very foolish, and where you find selfish ambition, you will also find disorder and every evil practice. Now, this is evident when you look at our world, our schools, and our communities. When someone has in mind their own individualized goals and ambitions, they naturally, to achieve these goals, have to take from others simply because we do not live in an infinite world. When someone takes, someone else has to give. And because this is the case, wars break out. People begin to take forcefully what they want and need without consideration of the other. Community no longer exists, and so we live in tension with others because they have what we want. Disorder is the only natural result. but the wisdom that comes from heaven is first all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace raise a harvest of righteousness. Now in James' day, the peasant class was being coerced into retaliation against the wealthy ruling class, which was being fed from the selfish ambition of the religious zealots. James is saying that the godly way of interacting with these people is to humbly submit yourself to God in love for your enemy. Peace over hatred is the godly way of life. Peace leads to righteousness, but hatred and selfish ambition lead to death. And so James continues in chapter 14 by asking, in chapter 4 by asking, what causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You want something, but you don't get it. You kill and you covet, but you cannot have what you want. You quarrel and fight. You see what James is saying? It is our selfish ambition that drives us to do terrible, terrible things. We would only fight if we were either offended or we wanted something for ourselves. We have such a high view of ourselves and we think that we deserve so much that we go to great lengths to achieve it. But in so doing, we trample our neighbor along the way. Or we, because we want great products at low prices, enforce slave labor to make those products. We don't want to give of ourselves, and why should we? After all, aren't we Americans? The mentality is to have all other people bow down to us, support our needs and desires so that we can have a comfortable life. But please notice how this is the mentality of the world, and it will be judged.